Studios podcast. I'm Chad, and I'm sitting here with
Vinny.
And right before we get started with the episode, make sure that you like, share, subscribe, whatever you can. It makes us know that you're watching, you're listening, and maybe you enjoy what we do. And so today, Vinny, what are we talking about?
Well, does it make you happy when they like, share, subscribe?
You know, not really, but I know it makes you happy.
It does. I do like getting the likes and the shares.
Yeah,
You know.
I mean, I think for me, it's just abysmal. Like it doesn't affect me one way or the other.
Right.
But I know that like other people like that stuff. So I'm trying to make sure like it seems like I like that stuff.
Right. And you have to say it.
Yeah.
In every episode, because I mean, if you don't, then people won't.
Right. And you know, I'm not saying, and me saying I don't care, it's not that I don't care. It's just like that doesn't drive me. Like, you know, it drives other people, you know?
Yeah, like in the comment section, you should write if you actually share or subscribe or comment, because we want to know how many people out there are doing that.
Yeah, I mean,
and not that he cares about it, but I do. So
yeah. I mean, that's so.
It makes me happy.
Yeah, it makes you content.
Not that I find contentment in it, but it makes me happy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're going today.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about
contentment
and happiness and the pursuit of happiness, I guess.
The pursuit of how interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, that tracks.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, right, I think contentment is a pretty vague subject because, and it's like, it can be various things at various times.
Right.
Like you can be content in one area of your life and have chaos in another.
Sure.
And I find that a lot of times in life, that's what's happening in most people's lives, where there's something happening in one area that's going super successful, and you're like, yeah, that's great, I'm happy there, but this other area of your life is like, really terrible, and it's like, man, I wish it was all working together, and also in contentment, it's really like, do you really ever want to be content?
Sure.
Because I find myself at a place now where it's like, if I find myself to be content, that means I'm not striving for something more.
Right.
And I always want to be going after something more rather than be content with what I can be happy with it.
Sure.
Like it's going well, super excited, like this is happening. But contentment, I feel like, leads to laziness.
Yeah, it does. And just one thing on a previous episode, me and Alexis were talking about a lot more fulfillment than contentment, because they are separate things.
Right.
And so what we're talking about too a lot of times is like, you know, chasing fulfillment, things like that. Are you the thing that you're chasing, the contentment that you're chasing, the place that you're chasing? Do you know what the end, like, do you know what that looks like? Like when you get it, you know, do you know? Because we were talking about how sometimes, you know, you're chasing a position or you're trying to go up a ladder, and then you look at the person that's in that position or that held that position, and you're like, I don't know if I'd want that person's life.
Right.
You know, and then I know a lot of people be like, oh, well, if I got it, I'd be different. And you're like, yeah, but like, would you really though? Like with maybe the weight of the position and like what it costs to hold that position.
It's good.
And so that's the kind of thing we were talking about. And like one of those things is like, you know, I think a lot of times contentment, it can definitely drive you like to a point where you're lazy, but then discontentment can make your life a mess.
Right.
Because obviously there's healthy levels of it in some degree. Like being uncomfortable, I think, is a better way to put it. Like if you're uncomfortable, I think it's better than discontentment. Because a lot of people be like, hey, I came up with this in a phase of my life where I was discontent, and then you start unpacking their life and like they just weren't okay with the status quo of life.
Right. That's good.
So they weren't discontent. They were just they weren't happy with what the status quo was.
Yeah, that's good.
And that's where like you look at a lot of the guys that have broken out of the mold and like created something, made a mark on like society. They were sick of how something was, and then they came out and fixed it or made it better or brought a solution.
Right.
And so I think it's one of those things of now it's like you look at these companies that have become content, right? That sit atop the thing. What's happening? They're getting leapfrogged. You look in the social media aspect, you look at everything.
Good.
They're getting leapfrogged. So it's like there's a side of it. It's like good to be content, and I think being fulfilled and being content are two different things. I want to be fulfilled at all times,
right?
But I don't need to be content at all times.
Yeah.
So I want to be fulfilled with what's going on in my life, but I don't need to be content,
right?
You know.
Yeah, I kind of relate what you're saying to a story our pastor has shared
Mm.
before about people that wanted to get into ministry, and then they get into ministry,
Yeah.
and then they're like,
Yep.
I will never have a Sunday off
Yeah.
or a weekend to
That was
myself
good. Yeah.
ever again.
Right.
And it's like people that are striving for this thing, and then
Yep.
when they get it, they realize that there's like they're not getting the fulfillment or
Yeah.
even the contentment that
Yeah.
they were seeking, because they didn't realize, like, man, that is something that I wasn't expecting.
Sure.
Like, not having us, I can't just do a family weekend. I
Sure.
can't just do this. I can't go away. Every Sunday, is ministry.
Yep.
And for me, like when I first was growing up,
Hmm.
like fulfillment and contentment for me was like, how much money
Oh, sure.
can I actually make?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was like what I strived for. Right.
Sure.
And then when I found Jesus in my life, and that transformed my thinking. Right.
Sure.
And without getting too spiritual or whatever, but it literally transformed the way I thought, and my mind went into my fulfillment is not my fulfillment.
Mm.
It's what am I doing for him?
Yeah.
That's fulfilling the call that he has on my life.
Good.
And so that's where I find my fulfillment now, is when I'm doing things and serving Jesus.
Yeah.
And if I'm not doing that, then I'm not content, and there's no fulfillment.
Right.
And that's where, I mean, what a conundrum! Like,
Yeah.
like, what a switch of life, when you're like, all I want is this money thing, and it's like, and then like I made tons of money before
Yeah.
I
Oh, sure.
got into ministry, went into Bible school and made zero money, and like, and
Yeah.
like that was my ideal of like, oh, that's what it's gonna be. Life is gonna be all about the
Yeah.
funds, and then it was like, no, life is really all about serving Jesus. And
Right.
when I recognized that and changed my life around, that's
Sure.
when I've really found fulfillment and contentment. But there are things in my life that are still chaotic and still crazy,
Sure.
but I'm content in all things because
Yes.
of my relationship with him and what I'm doing for him.
Sure.
Am I discontent at some of the things I do?
Yeah.
Yes, but it's still doing what I've
Right.
always wanted to do.
Right.
Well, not always, when I found
Yeah.
Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And so like I always thought when I was growing up, I was going to be a police officer,
Sure.
grow up, become a cop, and help people. That
Yeah.
was my heartbeat. That's where I found,
Wow.
like, I love to help people.
Yeah.
And like, with kids, youth, whatever. That's what I was doing as a kid. And then I was in school to become a cop, going to, working, making tons of money. And we call that working. I was doing things you shouldn't do when you want to become a cop. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And so that was a, weird phase of my life.
Yeah.
And then, when you find Jesus, and then you're like, oh, wow,
Yep.
and that's where I went. And
Yeah.
I,
But that the flip, or the script kind of flipped, in the sense that what the litmus test of if your contentment and your fulfillment aligns with God is when it's no longer about yourself.
right.
And like you have that change of like, now, like, hey, what fulfills me is like I can be in a place to help others, or hey, I can now operate in God's calling in my life rather than chasing material things.
Yep.
That's when like your flip, or your switch kind of gets flipped, and you're like, okay, like now I'm chasing things kind of eternal.
Mhm.
But obviously there's that tension of like, well, hey, I still want to have a successful job, and still want to, be
Right.
with my family and everything like that. Because I think a lot of times people can kind of like say like where they are right now, like it drives them to the point of discontentment or
Right.
things like that. And I think my thing is like, and we were talking on the previous thing, is like, as long as like what I'm chasing has God behind it,
Right.
then I can feel fulfilled and
Right.
feel content, because I know what I'm chasing is God's there.
Right.
But if I'm chasing something, because like what I was saying is like we were having the conversation with Alexis, and I said, you have people that are like, well, hey, we were talking about how a lot of times like prophecy and things can like dilute what you feel like is contentment.
Right.
Because like it's like, hey, you're gonna go to the nations, you're gonna
Yeah.
be this,
that's
you're
good.
gonna be a millionaire, and then you're sitting here and you're like, well, hey, there's this business deal, it's kind of shady, but like, hey, that maybe that's how I become a millionaire.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Right.
then all of a sudden your life's a mess.
Right.
And it's like that, and that wasn't the path you were supposed to go down.
Exactly.
And so I think that's the thing, is a lot of times we take things at face value, and we chase face value things.
It's good.
And we end up kind of being discontent, and we go, well, wait, I thought I was chasing what I was called to do.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, you were chasing the face value thing. You were chasing the name recognition.
Yeah.
You were chasing the pulpit, the platform, but you weren't chasing, God's gift for you, God's path for you. And so I think, and that
It's good.
is so, construed.
Yeah. So we can go a lot.
Yeah,
of places right now.
yeah.
I like this chat.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
good.
yeah.
So first off, like when you think about, like, not every open door is a door that God opened.
Right.
Right. And so like when you're thinking about, oh, that's going to be what does it for me.
Yeah.
That might not be the door that God's telling you to go down.
Right.
Right. God might be like on the other side of this over here,
100%.
and telling you to wait,
Yep.
that ain't it. And the other side of it, is, the Bible says in Psalms to delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. And for contentment to come in, I think you have to live in this verse where you're delighting yourself in the Lord.
That's it.
And then those desires that you have are now shared with him.
Yeah.
And therefore you're going in the same place. And so when that happens, that's when ultimate contentment happens. That's when things. Does that mean life is perfect? No. Like, does that mean my desires are always being answered? No. Like, I could tell you right now, the desire of my heart changed completely in my life. Like, I took that verse on for my wife and I before we were husband and wife. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do everything I can, serve Jesus. He's going to give me the desire of my heart. The desire of my heart is to marry this girl. It's going to happen.
Sure.
Right? It happened.
Yeah.
I married that girl. Praise the Lord. Right?
Right.
The desire of my heart now is for all my kids to be serving the Lord.
Sure.
Right? Is that happening right now? No. That's not I'm not living that life right now.
Right.
Right? But I stand on his word.
Sure.
And what am I doing? I am delighting myself in the Lord on the daily so that I can get the desired outcome, which is my kids serving the Lord.
Yeah.
And so will I see it come to pass? I believe I will, because God is a yes and amen.
Yeah.
His promises are for me, and I know that. So I think when you look at it, so am I content with my life right now? Yes.
Sure.
Because I'm serving him. I'm delighting myself in him.
Yep.
Am I content in all circumstances?
No.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm good because I know and I stand on his word.
Right. And you've seen him do it before.
Right. And when you have that foundation and you have the miraculous, you've seen the stuff that I've seen in my life where I've seen him come through at the craziest times, I know he's going to do what he says he's going to do. Yeah. So I just stand on it and wait for it to happen. So does that mean I'm content? Nope. But I'm striving for whatever's next. And I'm going to keep on going for it. And I'm going to delight in him the whole entire time, because if I don't, I think that's complete disobedience in what he wants from me. Right. And I don't want to ever be that.
Right. And the thing too is, like, with what you're contending with God for, it's one of those things, it's going to be a process. It's not something that can happen overnight.
And I can't do it.
Right.
It only can be him. So how do I make something that only he can do happen in my life? Right. You delight in him.
Yep.
Right. You delight in his word. You're fascinated by him. You're working for him. You're doing those things. Yep. And ultimately it'll come to pass because he's a man of his word.
See, and that's the thing there is, you're not striving for something.
Right.
And I think a lot of times striving leads to discontentment.
That's good.
Striving leads to unfulfillment because we're doing it in our own strength.
Yep.
And so eventually when we have that handoff of, okay, hey God, it's not in my will, it's not in my power, it's yours. Now, what we have to be ready for is the path that we go down is not the path we want to go down.
Right.
We don't want to wait 5 years for a promise, but that may be the path. And the problem is the longer that we fight it, the longer the longer of the process where God has to dig things out of us to make us come into alignment, because that's what it is. It's the delighting, but it's also the alignment. It's coming in alignment with God and saying, hey, this is not my will. I want this to happen now.
Right.
But I know that you have a bigger plan in place. You have things going on that I can't see right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to submit to your order, to your will, and follow along and know that, hey, I know because I've seen you do it before, you'll do it again, but I'm going to have to be okay with you not doing it right now.
Right.
And that's the part where people fight the discontentment. We fight the discontentment is, how do we, I think it's one of those things. It's like, can you praise God in your discontentment? Can you still call him God?
Right.
Can you still have faith when you're living in this place of God? Why isn't this happening? Because, I think a lot of people would say like, well, a family member to be serving the Lord, like that's like God, like that, you want that, God, like, why isn't it happening right now?
Right.
And I think it's one of those things that we don't know the pruning that has to happen. We don't know the things that they have to go through in their life, because ultimately what is it? It's a choice.
Right.
It's a human choice. So they have to come to their own human choice, and we can't push it. And when we do push it, it makes it worse.
100%. We become the worst.
Yeah.
And, and then, it is a hard situation to be in, when you're dealing with that kind of thing. But, do I find myself in tears at moments? Yes. That doesn't mean I'm not happy with the Lord.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I don't love the Lord with all my heart. If I ask him a question.
Right.
Like, why is this happening? Right.
Sure.
Like,
right.
I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't mean I'm not content with him when I say, you know what, God, like, this situation is awful.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean I'm not happy with him.
Sure.
It just means like, okay, God, I would love this to work out now.
Yeah.
But, like when Jesus went to the cross, he wasn't like,
it's good.
He did ask, he questioned, and he said, hey, if it's possible, take this cup from me.
He also said, why have you forsaken me?
Right.
When he was on the cross,
right. Like,
which is a whole other thing. Yeah.
Right. Like the whys, and so it's okay.
Yeah.
Like if Jesus can ask some questions and ask God to take things away, like, because the pain is a lot, it's okay for us to do that. Like as parents, as for our when we're going after our kids and that, like those are good questions.
Yeah.
And the great thing is like when God responds. And don't worry. Like they're coming home. Like there's so many stories that we've heard of, families that have dealt with things like we're dealing with currently. Yeah. And it's like, but they came home, and it's like, okay, so we just wait. And, as much as the pain's there and, the discontentment, right? Like if that's what you want to call it, but it's like, man, I'm not discontent in him. Right. I'm discontent with the situation.
Yep.
Right. And it's not about what I can do. It's about what I know he can do. Yeah. And I just have to say, God, only you. Yeah. Only you. And be okay with it. And with the weight, Yeah. And I think a lot of stuff happens in that process. Yeah. And you learn and you grow. Yeah. There's so many different circumstances we could be talking about. That's very similar to this too, where people are going after things and whatever. So don't just like focus on what I'm talking about today, because when you think about it, like this can be anything that you're going after, whether it's a job, whether it's something in your life that you're like striving for, right? So, mine just so happens to be like that's my goal right now.
But I think what it boils down to in this whole conversation is, are you discontent with the Lord? Right. Because if that's the case, that's a you problem. Right. And I think and that's the whole thing is where are you finding your contentment in? Right. What is your litmus test?
Yeah,
ultimately.
and like once you have to recognize one thing with God never changes.
Yeah, never.
Same, his word stays the same yesterday, today, forever. And like when you are okay with the fact that things happen to you, not because God is doing this thing and whatever,
Right.
think of like smite me almighty,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
come on, right? Like
right.
that's not that God is loving. He wants the best for us. I mean, his word all over the place says that he's going to work things together for good
Hmm.
for those that are called by him, right? To do good works according to his purposes, right? So like the word says that he's going to bless us, right? That
Yeah,
we're going to be the head, not the tail. All these
yeah,
promises that we have. And when just because something's not going your way, you
right,
start to curse him, like
right.
what's your relationship with him like?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? That's not really a relationship. That's
it's good.
God, you didn't do this for me, so I'm not going to serve you. That's not how it works, bro. That's definitely
Yeah,
not how it goes.
no,
Right? I'm going to serve him no matter what
it's good.
because he doesn't change.
Yeah,
Therefore, I can't change the way I think about him based on my circumstances, right?
yeah,
Whether my circumstances are bringing me to contentment or chaos, that's the circumstance I'm in.
sure.
He doesn't change.
Yeah,
The circumstance does, right?
exactly.
God's still the same God. He's
Yeah,
the same every step of the
yeah,
way.
it's good.
And when you can recognize that it's not him changing, it's your feeling for him changing, right? And then
It's key.
stop with your feelings and focus on him, right?
Right.
Like if you just took your feelings out of the equation and just looked at him as creator, almighty God, like creator of the heavens and earth, and said, man, like when you think about that, like I'm getting goosies just
Yeah, I
thinking
know.
about
I
it,
know. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
When you think about that side of God, it's like
Right.
I can't change my feelings
Yeah.
because of what's happened just now. Like I need to be content and know that he is God no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And ultimately he is
Yeah.
for me. What's the Bible said? He's for
Yeah.
me, not
Not
against me.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that where you're at in that situation, in that scenario, if anyone's out there in that scenario, it's one of those things where you're having to go, okay, God, I know who you are. My situation says otherwise.
Right.
It's like where are you? Where are you? Okay, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
He hasn't though, and that's the thing because he's never changed. He has the best track record
Right.
of anybody in your life, anyone you've ever met. He has the best track record of. So I think sometimes when we relate to God, we relate to God with maybe the best relationship we've ever had, or
Right.
we relate with human relationships.
So can we get like
Yeah,
so we're getting
yeah,
super
yeah.
spiritual right now?
Yeah.
Like I always think of that, like, why have you forsaken me?
Uh-huh.
Like think of yourself as a dad, right?
Right.
Right. Your son
Mm.
is nailed to a tree,
Mm-hmm.
right? With all the sins of the world put upon him,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is what the sacrifice that
Yeah.
Jesus did for us, right?
Right.
And dad
Mm-hmm.
has to witness that.
Yep.
I couldn't do it.
No. Absolutely not.
I couldn't do it as a dad. So why have you forsaken me? You know what forsaken means? Why have you turned your back on
Turn
me?
it back. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
He had to turn away because you can't.
Exactly.
He couldn't look at his
Sure.
son in that
Yep.
predicament.
Right.
He couldn't look at him
Right.
in that state of mind.
Right.
So in order to fulfill scripture, Jesus said what he says,
Right.
and fulfill the
Yeah.
prophecies and all of that. But when you look at what God was doing in that
Yeah.
moment, he was being a dad.
Yeah. Right.
Like he's like, I can't look at him. And also being God who can't look at the sin,
Mm.
can't be around the
Yep.
sin. And his son became sin so that we
So
could be
much, yeah.
forgiven.
Yeah.
And so there's so much craziness in that
But
story.
the thing,
But you look at that.
that's what God went through. That's what Jesus went through, so that we can be content with it.
Yes.
That's where all this leads to is he had to have that moment of being forsaken, and God had to have that moment of watching his son die on
Right.
a tree, so that we can have communion. Because that's the thing. Look in the Bible, they didn't have like you think you feel forsaken now. Think how the children of Israel felt,
I mean, they went 400 years without hearing from him, right? Like, think about that.
and you
Right?
think
And
you're
then-
forsaken.
And then
I mean-
they hear from him and they deny him. I mean, there's so much to this, but
so much.
like you think like that, you want to be content. You missed your contentment. You missed being content. Believe in Jesus. You'll be content.
Yeah.
And follow him fully.
I mean, that's where we landed.
I mean, that's ultimately where you got to go, right?
Have to.
And that's my life. When I look at it and say, man, I strived for so many things until I found him.
Yep.
And I didn't have to strive any longer.
Right.
I know where my contentment lies. It lies in Jesus Christ, and I don't need anything but him in my life. Oof, my God.
There it is. Well, all right. Well, this has been a great episode, and so we just hope that you'll join us next time, and make sure you like, share, subscribe, especially this episode, and we'll see you next week.